Blessing to be with you all this evening. I want to share one bit of news and then I'll address two apparent contradictions. The bit of news that I'd like to share with you all, first of all, is that this Friday after the wedding that some of you are aware is happening, we're going to be heading down to, or rather up to Cheras. I'm going to be preaching there on Sunday, and we're going to get to visit Philip a bit. So if you have anything that you'd like to pass for Philip, I wish I'd mentioned it before. Young Yao says, yes, I do. All right, so if you're in that category of things to pass to Philip, then you can stop by the school tomorrow or the next day and give those things to me, and I'll happily carry those up to him. So that means we're not going to be here on Sunday, so keep us in your prayers as we travel up there. The other two things that I was going to do, the two apparent contradictions. I'm teaching a class on marriage, and I've been proclaiming the virtues of sitting with your wife, and then I didn't do it tonight. I've taken for granted that she has been down there teaching in the kids class, which she has been. She's been given a night off because it's their midterms, which I hope you'll be praying for our students. They're almost done with their midterms, but they still have some to finish, and so I apologize to my wife for not sitting with her, and it just occurred to me while I was sitting there singing the songs, I'm not sitting in the right place. I just remembered that she was in the audience this evening. It only means that I'll have to be a little bit more careful about what I say. All right, but the other apparent contradiction, no, I do not approve of her dress, by the way. I said to my wife, everybody will know that's a cartoon, right? And yeah, it is a cartoon. Her dress is too short, though. Okay, so ladies, don't take any advice from the arguing lady on the screen. All right, let's go ahead and get started this evening. And tonight we're going to be talking about conflict in marriage. And I've given this the little subheading of keeping the inevitable from being the regrettable. And one of the points that you can obviously see in that, if you understand both of those words, inevitable and regrettable, is inevitable means it's going to happen no matter what. Regrettable means you wish it hadn't. And so conflict in marriage is inevitable. It is going to happen no matter what. I remember while we were still dating, there was a woman who told us, asked us if we had fights. And we said, yes, even while we were dating, we had fights. My wife and I are both very strong-willed people. And one of our pastimes, even when we're not being serious about it, is to argue about things that don't matter. And so that's just a part of the dynamic of our relationship along those lines. And so, yeah, we've had fights. And then this lady says, oh, that's not good. I've never had a fight with my husband. And I kind of wondered about that. Well, either she has a different definition for the word fight than I have, or, well, let's just say it this way. I wonder what her husband would have to say about that. You know, people sometimes think that there is such a thing as having a marriage without conflict. Not true. In fact, as we're going to notice this evening, when God portrays marriage by inspiration, He actually portrays conflict as existing in marriage, needs not being fulfilled. And we're going to be looking at that this evening. So to get our minds ticking over on this, let's talk about the honeymoon period. And the word honeymoon we mentioned last time, and we said that really there shouldn't be a honeymoon period in terms of where there's this time where everything's nice and then everything gets terrible after that. But reflection on reality, that's the way that people view marriage. In fact, the word honeymoon apparently comes from, I don't know how to say that, this is Middle English, honeymoon, or mon, maybe, I don't know. A term proverbial, this is, like I said, well, proverbially is a normal word, but I just can't say it. This is a definition that I found off Wikipedia, true or false, I don't know, but it says it's from 1552. Anyway, proverbially, why can't I say that word? I'll just skip over that one. Applied to such as be newly married, which will not fall out at the first, but the one loveth the other at the beginning exceedingly. The likelihood of their exceeding love appearing to assuage ye which time the vulgar people call the honeymoon. And so it's a period of exceeding love, and then that exceeding love assuages. The word assuage means to die down. All right, so the exceeding love dies down. And that was in 1552, if that quote is accurate. And so what does that tell us about this? Well, for at least 500 years, people have viewed the time immediately after marriage as being the peak of love. And how often is it when you were newly married and you were holding hands with your new spouse and you were at church? How often, has everybody heard this? We certainly have. Has the older couples look at you doing that, holding hands, being all kind to each other? they say something like, "Oh, that'll pass. That'll pass." And so the common view of this is that this time of enjoyment, this time of exceeding great love, it eventually goes away. And from that peak of great love comes decline until one of two things happens: death or divorce. All right? And for Christians, divorce is not an option. But for some Christians, I think that they live as though death couldn't come soon enough. All right? Because of the way that they have misused, really, the idea of marriage. So as you think about that with me, that's the world's understanding of marriage. Is this God's view of marriage? Does God view marriage as beginning with an amazing peak, like we see there in Song of Solomon chapter 4? And does He then see it as an inevitable decline all the way until death? Or does God see it only as the beginning? There's a passage of Scripture that I oftentimes bring up to people who are older than me. And when I am older, I hope people will bring it up to me as well. What do we do when we get older? Around the world, I've observed older people doing this same thing. What do? You talk about the good old days. You don't talk about the old days. It's the good old days. What are you talking about? You're talking about how things in the past used to be better. How things in the past are better than the way that they are now. If only we could return to the good old days. Well, I love what Solomon said about this, and this is in a different book, Ecclesiastes chapter 7 and verse 10. What does he say? "Do not say, or say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these?" Don't ask, why were those the good old days, or why are these days now not as good? Don't ask that. He says, you don't inquire wisely concerning this. You haven't thought about it wisely. As good as you think those days were, the reality is that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And as you're removed from those days, they look better and better as you get older and older. But the second reality of it is that even if they were truly the good old days, they're no longer in existence. Today is the only day that you have. And so we can't view our married lives as beginning with this awesome, great period of love and then inevitably declining to nothing. That's not the way that God thinks about the present. You know, you've sent around that corny email. What is the present? A gift. All right, you probably have gotten that email or even sent it around yourself. The present is a gift. Well, treat it like that. And treat it like that within the context of your marriage. God's view of marriage simply is that there will be a honeymoon, or there should be. In fact, if there's not a honeymoon, and for some couples that don't approach marriage from the right motivations or with the right attitudes, there really isn't a honeymoon. There should be a honeymoon. It should happen. God pictures it as being there. But after the honeymoon comes some other things. And the first of those other things is conflict. 3 things we're going to make clear during our study tonight and next week and the week following. First of all, even in God's inspired picture of marriage, conflict follows the honeymoon. It will happen. You can guarantee that it's going to happen. Second, God never intended for conflict to be a way of life. He never intended for that to be what marriage was about. In other words, where there's just this kind of grudging sticking it out or staying with each other for the sake of duty and obligation. That's not what God wants for your marriage or for mine. And then third, God never intended for romantic love to fade away with time. He never intended for there to be an end to the kind of true affection, true appreciation, and true enjoyment of your spouse that is so often what is a part of the world's view of marriage. He never intended for that to be the way it is. Now, as you think about the old chart that we've been putting up every week, good, better, and best, as you approach conflict in marriage, realize that there's a good, better, and best. Good along those lines is, and I wonder if this is good, if this is really good, in other words, if it's not even on the side of wrong, to live in a continual state of conflict, but somehow stay together. Every day you wake up and what are we going to argue about today? Is it where I've left my laundry? Is it how you've made my breakfast? Or is it how you demand of me to make your breakfast? Is it how you smack your lips when you eat something, or how you bite the fork, or whatever it is that you do in the context of the marriage? What's the argument going to be about today? That's how some people view their marriage. What's the argument going to be about today? And they live in almost a perpetual state of conflict. Well, I don't know if that's really right, but if you manage to stay together, some people might say, well, that's what marriage is meant to be. I say there's something better than that. Better than that is to handle conflict constructively. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight and next week. How do we handle conflict constructively? But even when you come to the point where you're handling conflict constructively, I want you to realize the best thing that you can possibly do for your marriage is to learn how to prevent as much conflict as possible. I'm not going to pretend to say you're going to get rid of it. It will still be there. But there are ways to prevent as much conflict as possible. And the way to do that really is with proactive and proper love. Now, as we begin this evening, let's realize that marriage is worth the trouble. And I want to point you to a proverb that was pointed out to me along these lines. In Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 4, you say, Patrick, what does this have to do with marriage? Where there are no oxen, the manger is clean, but abundant crops come by the strength of the ox. Well, let me put it into a context for you. You know, oxen are smelly creatures. And you can imagine that one of the less enjoyable things that you would do as a farmer is, on the one hand, feeding your oxen, putting the feed into the trough, and then watching as they smack it all over the place. Oxen getting the grasses flying everywhere, mingled with spit. And then obviously we all know what happens when cows eat grass. Well, maybe you don't in Singapore. I know what happens when cows eat grass. It doesn't come out as grass, all right? And it's not very pleasant on the other side of the digestive process, all right? It's not a pleasant thing. And if you watch cows, which you may or may not be tempted to do, but if you've ever seen a cow before, they can literally be standing there and they're eating the grass on the one end, and on the other end, things are falling out. And I won't be more specific than that along those lines. And so you say, as these cows are chomping up their food from the manger or from the food trough, man, these cows cause a lot of mess. Life would be better without cows. Well, do you realize, and the farmer did realize this, that a lot of cows, and by the strength of the oxes rather, comes much crops. In other words, yes, there are some bad things that come along the way with having these oxen. But the blessings that come from having these oxen far outweigh any of the bad things that happen or any of the messes that we have to clean up. Well, the same thing is true of marriage. The same thing is true of marriage. Marriage brings mess into our lives. Me, quite literally. I'm not the most tidiest of people along those lines. Leave socks and things all over the place. My wife is constantly finding socks in the strangest of places. As I've gone along, I've just felt that was the good place to take them off, and then I forget about them instantly. That's just the magic that I am able to perform. And so she's finding socks in these places. Marriage is a mess, but it's a mess that I hope, maybe I have to ask my wife, is it worth it? I hope it is. I hope it is worth it. It certainly is for me. Marriage is worth the mess. Preventing conflict is where we were going to begin, even though we're going to be tossed into conflict as we begin to open up the Song of Solomon this evening. We're going to look at this verse and we're going to think about how could this possibly have been prevented, because that's really where we want to be. That's the excellent way of life, learning how to prevent conflict before it even happens. All right, so Song of Solomon chapter 5 verse 1 is the close of the honeymoon. The husband is basking in the glow of his wife's love. And then we get to chapter 5 and verse 2, and the wife here is thinking. And the wife says, I sleep, but my heart waketh. And so she's in her sleep, and then all of a sudden she wakes up. And why is she waking up? Well, it is the voice of my beloved that knocketh. What does Solomon have to say? Open to me, my sister. So he began to think about and add up the evidence that he had been gathering from all these different cases that he had studied.
And along those lines, he came up with the idea that marriages fall apart because fundamental needs are not being met. And that's the premise or the foundation from which this book was written. And if you can't gather from this title, those fundamental needs for men and women are often different from each other. They're often complementary, but at the same time they're different from each other. And so what he does is to break down his needs, her needs, into 5 different common needs. And as you look through this list, see if this is not true. You might not be able to say, I have all 5 of those needs, but to some degree you'll probably have 1 or 2 of those needs. Now, just because it's his need does not mean it's not her need. And just because it's her need doesn't mean it's his need along those lines. These are very typical of the cases that this man has studied. But you're going to find 10 basic sets of needs anyway. He's divided them into what is generally masculine, generally feminine. So first of all, his needs, what are they? If it's any surprise to you, it should not be. One of his needs is sexual fulfillment. And realize that men along these lines are biologically wired this way. And I'm not just talking about psychologically wired this way. They are biologically wired this way. There is an aspect to male anatomy that causes them to seek to have sexual fulfillment, particularly when they come of marriage age. And that's why it's so hard for young people to remain sexually pure, because their bodies are active along these lines. And that is why God gave the marriage relationship as a proper channel for these things. Now, one of my working definitions of the word lust is this. Lust is a right desire that's taken a wrong way. I've never found that in a book, but I want you to see if you disagree with that. Lust is a right desire that's taken a wrong way. And think about it from the standpoint of sex. Lust is a right desire taken a wrong way. Is there a right way to express human sexuality? We've been talking about this over the past few weeks. Absolutely yes, with an exclamation point on it. The right way to express human sexuality is within the marriage bed. And when God looks at the marriage bed, what does he see? Nothing but honor. Marriage is honorable in all. The bed is undefiled. There is nothing wrong, and in fact, everything right about the marriage bed. But you take that right desire and you turn it into a wrong way. You start looking for sexual fulfillment outside of the marriage relationship. Okay, so that's his first need. His second need is recreational companionship. Why? You notice how men do this with other men? You know, why is it brothers, this is an interesting question, even though it's not particularly, it's not sexually exclusive. But at the congregation here, why is it brothers that walk and not sisters that walk? Why is that? Because what is the walk? Recreation. It's not shopping, it's not eating, it's walking. What is the benefit that you get out of walking? Sweat. And you see nice things. But no tangible benefit comes out of all of that. It's recreation. And I don't know how typical or atypical my wife and I are, but I generally like to go to the walks whenever I can, and my wife generally likes to sleep on Saturday mornings. And that's okay. You know why? Because it's brothers that walk. It's not sisters that walk, even though the sisters are more than welcome to come. But why is it that way? Because men seek that recreational companionship. And when men get together, we don't want to talk to each other. We just want to do stuff. We don't want to have, my wife calls it sharing. And I've told her, we have these jokes between me and her. I've told her I'm a man. I don't share. I'm more than happy for you to share, but for me, it doesn't come so easily. And so oftentimes she does, without me even realizing it, she does get me to share. But it's definitely not one of my favorite exercises along those lines. When I go out with a guy, I just want to do something. And that's what guys generally want. Best case scenario is when the person that they're married to can become one of those people that they just do stuff with. Why is it that men who plan all these dates oftentimes, not always, why is it that men are so quick to run to dinner and a movie? Because there's no talking that happens during the movie. Ladies, do you realize this? Men have realized this, okay? recreational companionship along those lines. The third need that men have, physical attractiveness. And you say, that's not fair. Well, that's what he discovered in the course of his study. Now, that doesn't mean that once you are a man and you've married a woman, all of a sudden she needs to become the next day a supermodel. That's not what it means. And that's not even what Harley expects women to do. Okay? What does Harley expect women to do? To maintain themselves. You know, one of the things that I really appreciate about my wife, and I don't tell her enough about these kind of things, is that she always tries to carry herself well. It's oftentimes that when we go, just the two of us go out for something, she'll be wearing a dress and makeup, and I'll be wearing shorts and a t-shirt. You know, and I'll at first, in the earlier days of our marriage, I used to say, "Do you mind me wearing this?" And she'll say, "No, I don't mind." And I'm like, "Why is she so dressed up?" And then I began to realize she's dressed up for me. She's dressed up for me because she wants to look nice for me. And even around the house, she often looks nice for me. Dresses up for me. And that's actually a very, very pleasant thing. And it's because in that, one of my needs is being met. She doesn't have to change who she is. I'll never tell her to change anything about her body. But along those lines, what is she doing? She's presenting herself well. That's what men are really looking for. They married you, they must have been attracted to you. So they're not looking for you to become something different. All right? What they are looking for you to do is to present yourself and carry yourself well. Fourth, domestic tranquility. He wants to have a peaceful home environment. And you say, well, ladies, well, in this side of society especially, you say, well, that's as much his job as my job. You know, you can't expect me to do all of these things. And you know, the maintenance of the house. Well, okay, all right, I realize the world in which we live oftentimes balances out some of these roles a bit more than what we see in Bible times. But at the end of the day, remember last time, I don't remember last time, one of the times before, remember how I said that the family's spiritual direction, whose responsibility is that? Family's spiritual direction, whose responsibility? The father's, the man's. He is the spiritual captain. Well, do you realize that, women, you are the house despot? And it's not translated like that, but if you look at Titus chapter 2, and verses 3 and 4 or thereabouts, where the old women are to instruct the women to be keepers at home, it actually is a literal translation of that would be the house despot, or the house, and you know, what's a despot? Is that next to the pots and the pans? No, a despot is an authoritative ruler. Whereas the man is the king of the spiritual ship that is the family. The wife is the queen and the authoritative queen of the direction of the house. You know, I fought against this when we first got married. You know, as a bachelor, I had no decorations up on the wall. Not except for my Rocky poster. I had a Rocky poster from the movie Rocky. Inspirational, or so I thought. Well, she came in and she wanted to put all this stuff up and wanted me to take down my Rocky poster. and it was a bit of a struggle until I realized, hang on, this is her domain. Now, wise wives will always give a corner for their husbands of the house. And so when we had a house that was large enough, and I still have my Rocky poster, unfortunately it's in Australia at the moment, I had an office, and my Rocky poster went in my office. And I go into my office, that's my cave, that's my spot. I can have papers and mess and nastiness all over the place. But the rest of the house is hers. She graciously allowed me to have that corner for myself. Right? Men are looking to you, ladies, to provide domestic tranquility. You are the queen of the home. You might not like that role, but it's a very important role. Do you know that the kind of mood that your husband has improves dramatically when he has a peaceful home? Do you know the kind of productivity your children have improve dramatically when they have a peaceful home? When things are in place, when things are in order, when meals are being served, when things are working. Now I know, and in fact in the first century there would have been some of this as well, I know that you can use proxies for these kinds of things. You can hire domestic helps, you can do these kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with you. You are the one responsible. Okay? So, fifth is admiration. One of my instructors said that the most important part of a man's body for a wife, the most important part of a man's body is his back. You say, why his back? Because he needs a pat on the back. And oh, do we need this in this culture. This is a very hypercritical culture. True or false? Is it? Isn't it that we complain about everything in the context of our everyday life? I don't have Facebook. Sometimes my wife shows me a thing or two on that you guys put up. And you just check yourself. How often am I complaining? How often am I complaining or saying something bad is happening? And again, it filters down. As I've said, when you're constantly commenting negatively about people's physical appearances, I'm not surprised when that actually translates into what you say in marriage. Well, the same thing. When you're constantly complaining about things in life, does that translate into marriage? How often does it? I'm sure it happens a lot. Well, husbands need to feel like heroes. You might say, well, I thought he was a hero when I married him, but he's a zero now. Well, there has to be something good about him, okay? And it's just like and good parenting works this way as well, by the way. I was taking a human development, what's it called? Behavioral psychology, something like that. I can't remember what course it was in uni. Human behavior and development, or something like that. And the teacher said that young people need 10 positive words for every one negative word. And I have to believe that that's a general rule in relationships. You know, you need more positive than you get negative. And so if you want wives, your negative things to have more weight or more impact, your husband needs for you to build him up, to encourage him, to tell him all the things that he's doing well. And don't be surprised, if he's a Christian and he has the kind of humility that he should, he's not going to listen to you and say, well, I'm the greatest. But at the same time, he's going to feel better and he's going to feel more encouraged to do what he must. It's one of his needs. Now, picking on the lady, her needs, typically. You notice how the first one for the men was sexual fulfillment. Well, the first one for the ladies is the opposite side of that. Not the opposite side, but the corresponding side of that, affection. It won't be so much the act of lovemaking that women will be seeking in some cases. In some cases, it will be the before and the after. The not just within that marital bed assembly, the day. What's happening during that day? Are there, from time to time, occasions where the husband comes and gives his wife a kiss on the cheek? Are there times and occasions where he praises her for the things that she is doing? A gentle caress, a gentle touch along those lines? Affection. It's what she's looking for. And it's what husbands seem to not understand. Because like I said a couple weeks back, or maybe last week, what is the husband along those lines? He's the proverbial microwave. What is the wife? Well, she's the slow cooker. Husbands think that they can automatically translate into something. Just whenever they want to start thinking about the marriage bed, it can happen right then. But for ladies, it does not work like that. And it has to be bathed in affection. The marital bed has to be bathed in affection. Intimate conversation. You see, he's out for recreational companionship, but she doesn't want to always go to a movie. Do you realize that? You try to get her to keep doing stuff with you, and before long, as I said, she's going to look for some sharing to happen. It's one of her needs. She needs to have intimate conversation. She wants for you, men, she wants for you to be her best friend. She wants to be able to share her feelings and complaints. There's a video that my wife showed me along these lines, and a lot of the times it feels like this. It's a video called "It's Not About the Nail." You can do a search for this video. And in this video, it's not about the nail. All right, that's the name of the video. There's a woman with a nail in her head, right? And she's talking to her significant other. And she says, "I've just got this pain in my head, and it keeps nagging at me." And he says, "Well, maybe you need to remove the nail." "Don't you talk about my nail!" I was like, okay, all right, I'll listen, okay. I just got this throbbing and this on sweaters and they keep getting snagged. And he's like, yeah, that must be hard. And that's what women are really looking for. What do men like to do when there's this intimate sharing happening? Men always like to give the solution to the problem, isn't it? They like to say, okay, you've got all these things, I've already got it figured out. God wired me that way, I'm logical. Okay, so here's what you need to do. You need to tell this person this, tell this person that, go by this, go by that, problem solved. She doesn't want any of it. She doesn't. She just wants to tell you her problems. And she wants for you to listen. It's one of her needs. Honesty and openness. This is very important for women. Men always like to have, like I've said, in the literal sense, the physical sense, they always like to have that corner, an office, so to speak. And that can be okay when it's an actual physical room, but sometimes, sadly, men like to have a corner that's closed off to their wives. And it's not about necessarily that they're doing anything wrong there. It's that they just don't want to share that with her. How often is it that you hear of women having two husbands and the husbands don't know about it? Do you ever hear of that? I'm sure it must have happened. But at the same time, it's so rare. But what is more common? For a husband to have two wives and the two wives don't know about it. Why is that? Because men like to compartmentalize. They like to have that hidden part of their life. Well, women don't like that. And women especially don't like that from their husband. They need honesty. They need openness. They need for there to be no corner of your life that is closed off or hidden. Fourth, financial support, no fears over money. They need for there to be a security along those lines. It doesn't mean that everything has to be provided for, that you have to have all the name brands and all these things. If that's the way the wife is thinking, then she has a problem along those lines. But she does have a right to know that you are going to do what God compels you to do, and what we've talked about before. If any man provide not for his own, he has denied the faith. He's worse than infidel. Men ought to provide, must provide, are commanded to provide financial security for their wives. And so that's one of her needs in many cases. And finally, family commitment. She needs for him to be interested in the kids, to care about the children. How often is it that the dad comes home from work and he's so stressed about all the things that have happened that couldn't really seem to care less about what the kids are doing? He just wants to do his thing, play his video games, talk to his friends, go on his things. And whatever the kids are doing, all that's her business. That's how it often happens in the world. But she needs for him to be involved in his children. She needs for him to be involved and care about the family. In case you haven't noticed along these lines, his needs are often entirely different from her needs. And the opposite is therefore also true. So what does this tell us about the marriage relationship? It means that we're going to have to do some reevaluating. Before I talk about this next book, we're going to have to do some reevaluating of where we're at. And I recommend getting this book, like I said, and doing the profile and figuring out what your needs are, sharing those with your spouse, and then talking about those things so that you can start fulfilling each other's needs. The other book that I recommend, and I know these are sermons within themselves, and I've probably gotten off on this a bit too much, but the second book that I want to recommend to you is 5 Love Languages, written by Gary Chapman. Gary Chapman is a pastor or a relational counselor. I'm not, as you know, comfortable with the term pastor, and it's not used in the sense of the Bible, but nevertheless, that's the title that he wears. And he's a relational counselor, and what he discovered is that marriages sometimes fall apart, not just because needs aren't being met, but because you're actually going about the meeting of those needs in 2 different ways. If I talk to you in Spanish and you talk to me in Chinese, we're not going to understand each other, are we? We're going to be communicating, but we won't really be communicating. The message will not be getting across. And the point that Chapman makes is that sometimes happens in the way that we express our love. Now, along those lines, he identifies 5 love languages, words of affirmation. In other words, words of praise. And there is some overlap between these 2 books, but I recommend reading them both. I found that his needs, her needs, for a logical person like myself, just really did it for me. But as much as it explained me, it didn't explain my wife. 5 Love Languages explain my wife and help me to understand her better. So I said that's why I recommend you to read both of these. Words of affirmation, in other words, saying good things about that other person. Quality time, spending time with your spouse along those lines. Receiving gifts. In other words, that when you feel loved when you receive gifts. This is, by the way, gift giving is the primary Asian love language I've come to realize. When people love you, they give to you. True or false? Is that the way it happens? I've noticed that happening a lot of times in a lot of the relationships that I've had. People will never say I love you, but they will show I love you by what they give. And that's what we're talking about with this giving of gifts being a love language. Acts of service is a love language. And these two are probably closely related, but I'll tell you the way it works for me. I read this book and I got done with it, and I'm like, I don't know, I don't identify with any of this. But then after a couple of years of marriage, it dawned on both my wife and I what my love language was. My love language is acts of service. It's not receiving gifts. I could care less what a person gives me sometimes, because what I want, I get. But if you want to make me happy, my wife often does, and I'm very thankful for that, she irons my shirts for me. Ladies are like, I'm going to tell her better after this lesson is over. She doesn't have to do that. Well, of course she doesn't have to do that. But it makes me feel pretty nice. All right? One of those things that I hated as a single man was ironing shirts. And oftentimes, and this is the plague of moving overseas for an American. In America, you have dryers. These amazing boxes that you put things that are wrinkly into. And they spin and spin and spin. And they come out, and yeah, most of the wrinkles are gone. They don't look perfect, but at least, hey, it's not a crumbled up ball. And then I come to Australia, and they don't have dryer sheets. They have dryers, but they don't have dryer sheets. And there's all these lines, and people are hanging up their clothes. And I'm like, I hang up my clothes, and they stay wrinkly. But it costs so much to run the dryer. And so I'm going around with these wrinkly clothes. And then I get married. It's nice. So acts of service, physical touch, just that caress, that touch, that hug, close contact. There are people that are like that. I'm sure you've had friends that are like that. When they talk to you, they always have a hand on you. Have you ever had a friend like that? That's their love language, their physical touch person. Now, keynotes along these lines: if you express love in the wrong language, your spouse will not get it. My mom's love language is gifts. I grew up listening to, I can't tell you how many lectures from my mom. When you get married, remember birthdays, remember anniversaries, buy her gifts, because my dad never bought my mom gifts. So many lectures I sat through. So much so that it was ingrained in me the moment our relationship began to give gifts. You can ask, the first time she visited me in Melbourne when we were long distance dating, I had a gift for every single day. A gift for every single day. There was a time, our 5th anniversary rolled around. I was talking to her on the phone that day, but we didn't share our 5th month. What did I say? Okay, 5th month anniversary of dating. We were talking on the phone. She was still living far away from me at that time. And she said, oh, there's a card for me. I hadn't said anything. And so she opens up the card, and in the card I've written, I bet you forgot it was our anniversary. And she had. But it was wired into my brain to give gifts. But I came to realize that that's not my wife's love language. I'd give a gift, and I'd be waiting for the big happiness and all these things, and it just wouldn't come. And I'd be like, what's wrong? What's happening? I wasn't speaking her language. Consequently, after she read this book, she thought that my love language was giving gifts. But no, I've only been taught to give gifts. I don't really care much about receiving gifts. And she would always have this struggle, and it really frustrated her for the early part of my marriage. What do I buy him? Nothing! Because if I wanted it, I've already bought it probably, and I don't want very much. So, she didn't know what to do. Until she realized that I like iron shirts. So, second along those lines, spouses often give the love they want to receive, but not always. So just realize it's helpful to actually go through this book. There's a profile you can do in the back. Figure out what your love language is. Typical stubborn man, I read the book, but I didn't do the profile, so it took me a couple of years to actually figure out what my love language was. Third, just as with his needs, her needs, spouses rarely speak the same love language. And so you might be thinking, I'm giving gifts, I'm giving gifts, I'm giving gifts, and I'm not receiving what I want to be receiving. Well, it's because maybe you're not receiving your love language. And maybe she doesn't have that love language along those lines. Even when spouses commit to discovering and meeting each other's needs, though, there will still be conflict. All right? I've gone on a massive tangent talking about these 2 books. I'm going to put in front of you 2 more resources that I would encourage you to make use of. First resource is recommended listening. This is actually the series of lessons that awoke me to the Song of Solomon. You can go and listen to these 4 sermons by David Shannon on, it's actually called Church Leaders Marriage. Forget about that. It's just talking about marriage. Don't worry about that. It's a lesson delivered to a bunch of preachers, and so that's why it is called that. But it's just talking about that. I recommend listening to those. They will supplement. And you might even find that I've taken a couple of things here and there from that, and so I give credit where credit is due. And so if you want that, you can have that. If you don't have time to write that down, I can send you the notes. Second thing is, in that lesson, he recommended this book, and I've gotten this book, and I also will recommend this book. It has a lot more scripture, obviously, in it, but it's written from a denominational standpoint. There are going to be some problems and issues that come up. But at the same time, what do you do with all this material? Even the ones that I've already recommended, you eat the meat and you spit out the bones. Okay? Eat the meat, spit out the bones. And so the 6 stages of conflict that we're going to go through, 3 of them tonight, 3 of them next week, actually are taken directly from this book. And so I want to give credit where credit is due. Okay, let's talk about stage 1, where both parties feel harmed. And let's return to our text, Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 2. We notice here where the husband is making an appeal to his wife. He says, "Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled, for my head is filled with dew, and my locks with the drops of the night." And so he makes this earnest appeal to her. She, of course, says something that doesn't correspond with that. Let's give a little bit of a side note here. As I mentioned before, Solomon and the Shulamite do not share the same bedroom. You say, well, God approves of that. Well, guess what? We are living under a better covenant. You open up Hebrews chapter 13, verse 4, and it doesn't say marriage beds, does it? Marriage bed. Now, there might be some circumstance that has you two sleeping in separate beds occasionally. Maybe it's physical distance, one of you is on a business trip. Maybe it's you just cannot get sleep for some reason when you're sharing the same bed, or whatever the case might be. There's not a command along these lines. But the problem is that when you don't share the bed, oftentimes what ends up happening? You don't share the bed. You get what I'm saying? When you don't share the physical bedroom, what happens? You don't enjoy the marital bed or the sexual fulfillment that's meant to happen inside that relationship. And I know this happens. All right? Why? I grew up in a house where my parents shared a bed until I was 8 years old. And then there was probably, how many years? Until I was maybe 5 years where they were in separate bedrooms. And Dad went to his bed at night, Mom went to her bed at night, actually separate bedrooms. And during that 5 years, that's where my dad developed his relationship with someone else. Okay, so that's real, all right? And that's what happens, okay? So just realize we live in a better covenant. Think about it from that standpoint. All right, so the Shulamite says, I have put off my coat, how shall I put it on? I've washed my feet, how shall I defile them? What is she feeling at this moment? The picture here is of the Shulamite lying comfortably in bed. To honor his request, she would have to get up. She would have to leave her nice warm bed. And I know you can't appreciate that as much as I can. If you've only lived in Singapore, then bed is nice, but it's not nice and warm, is it? Unless you've got the air conditioning on high blast, isn't it? Bed is not any more or less comfortable than being out of bed. But if you live in a place where there is winter, or if you ever experience cold weather, then believe me, when that call comes from the alarm clock in the morning, you don't want to get up. You're nice and warm. And being out of bed is a very unpleasant experience. And so she's going to have to leave her nice and warm bed. She's going to have to put on a robe. She's going to have to go to the door. In the process, walking across the floor, her feet are going to get dirty. So I have to wash them again, get back into bed. And so this is something that maybe we can't appreciate as much, but you can probably draw some kind of modern parallel. Basically, what she's saying to her husband is this: didn't he just have me one chapter ago? Why does he want me again? And this is sometimes how ladies approach the marriage bed. You know, I've already fulfilled his need. So why do I have to keep on doing it? Well, because it's his need. And like I said, he is built biologically to have that need very regularly met. In fact, there is a biological cycle that happens within a man between 48 and 72 hours where his body tells him to have that need met. Now that doesn't mean he has to have it met at that point. The body will figure out ways to still survive, even if that need is not met. Obviously, people survive without being married along those lines, and it's not through self-gratification, mind you. Okay? But he's designed to have that need regularly met. So, didn't he just have me one chapter ago, is what she says. But Solomon persists. My beloved put his hand by the hole of the door. And so the hole of the door latch is how that's translated in other versions. And so what is he doing? She has the door locked, but he's trying it. And so he's not. And then she hears of him trying to open the door. And as she hears that, her first reaction of selfishness, I've just woken up, is replaced by, this is my husband. This is my husband who is looking for me. And so her bowels are moved within her. That doesn't mean that what we might think it to mean. That's the seat of the emotion for the Hebrew. And so her heart is yearning. She says, my husband needs me. And so she reaches out to him, and notice how she portrays her hand poetically. My hands drop with myrrh, my fingers with sweet-smelling myrrh. And so she wants to touch him sweetly, expressing affection to him, which is probably her need. And so she's reaching out to him. She gets up out of bed, reaches to the door, opens the door, but he's gone. He's gone. What Solomon must have felt? Probably frustrated. He's knocked at the door. He said his head has gotten damp from the dew. That means he's probably been out there for a little while. He's knocked on the door, he's frustrated. And then, after a while, he tries the door, it's still locked. He feels rejected. He feels even deflated. Well, okay. All of that love language that had come out in terms of words of love. What did he say in verse 2? All those words of praise to her. And then not fulfilled, not rewarded. And so he walks away. The thought might have been something like this: well, I'm not going to stand here all night. I'll go somewhere else. The sad thing about marriages is, as Harley points out, marriages fall apart when spouses consistently go somewhere else. Marriages fall apart when spouses go somewhere else. You know why? Because we can't be surprised when somewhere else turns into someone else. What Harley noticed in his marital counseling is that when people do not have their needs met, they will go to someone who meets their needs. He does a lot of his work is actually surrounding when the marriage has gotten so bad that it's come to an affair. And he's written 2 other books that I actually also recommend: Love Busters and Surviving an Affair. Love Busters talks about how to deal with the annoying habits and things that happen in marriage as well. So those are 2 other books. And I haven't read Surviving an Affair. Thankfully, we haven't had to worry about that. And I hope we never have to worry about that. But I have it on my shelf. I have read Love Busters, and I recommend that book because of the things that it covers in that. So that's what he noticed. People were going to other people to have their needs met. And with the same stories happening over and over and over again. So that's what happens. We can't be surprised. Our needs often don't match up with our spouse's needs. We've already talked about that. Often, though, we must sacrifice to meet our spouse's needs. Love can only sacrifice, though, when it's being continually replenished. One of the things that you'll see in both Harley and, what's the other one I mentioned? I already forgotten. Chapman's book, one of the things that you'll see common is this idea of the love bank, or the pool of love, or whatever they use to describe it. And you have to have enough love within you to give love. And that's them talking from a worldly standpoint, obviously, with some pseudo-Christianity thrown into it. There has to be something there in order for there to be something to give. Ephesians chapter 5 verse 21 is very interesting, and I want you to open your Bibles here. We oftentimes do not connect this with marriage and the marriage text. I think we should. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 21. In verse 22 in the King James Version, wives is in all capital letters as though it's the beginning of a new section. But the reality is that what you see at the close of verse 21, that period just isn't there in the original text. It's not there. It's an assumed period. It's an assumed end of the discussion. But what if we looked at it the other way? What if we got bombed by fighter jets? All right, what if we looked at this the other way in verse 21? Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God. What if that was talking about marriage? What if that was talking about how a man submits to the needs of his wife, and the wife submits to the leadership of her husband? Submitting to one another. And so to ensure that submission happens where it should, one has to submit. And there has to be this kind of idea of mutual submission. Now, having said all of that, God does not call us to be love. God calls us to love. And another passage, again, I wonder if we should connect this with the marriage passages. In 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 through 7, you find that Peter talks about the subject of marriage, and many people think in verse 8 he changes the subject. Does he? Maybe he doesn't. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Well, that's not the right verse. I'm realizing as I'm turning to 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8. Sorry. Finally, be ye all of one mind, having compassion one of another. Having compassion one of another. What if he's talking about wives, verses 1 through 6, and husbands, verse 7, when he says that? To have compassion one another. You know, in marriage, this is still true. Recompense no man evil for evil. That's still true. There'll be times when you don't want to repay what your spouse has done with kindness, but you need to. There'll be times when you'll be waiting for him to do good to you, or for her to do good to you before you do good back to her. But let it always be true of you, faithful Christian, that you are the first mover. You are the first one to try to respond to their needs. And so, as you would that men should do to you, do to them also likewise. That's what we call the golden rule. And it works in marriage, or at least it should. Love is more than a word. Let us love not in word or in tongue, but in deed, and in so doing in truth. 1 John chapter 3 and verse 18. Stage 2, a change of heart. We're going to rush through these a bit, and I'll share these notes with you like I said, but a change of heart here. In Solomon chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, I opened to my beloved, but he had withdrawn himself and was gone. My soul failed when he spake. I sought him, but I could not find him. I called him, but he gave no answer. Solomon's gone. Where is he? The watchmen that went about the city found me. They smote me. They wounded me. The keepers of the walls took away my veil from me. I charge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, that you tell him that I am sick of love. Is this meant to be taken literally? Has she actually gone around the city? Where is Solomon? Where is Solomon? And it's at nighttime, and so people think she's crazy. And the watchman grabbed her and actually give her a smack, which probably happened sometimes to women who men thought were crazy in those days, when there was less respect for women. And then giving her a smack. What are you doing, you crazy woman? I'm running around at night. And she's saying to the audience of the Song of Solomon, who is the daughters of Jerusalem, she's saying, I am sick of love. She wants to find her husband. And so what's happened? She's changed. At first, she didn't want to respond to his need. Now she's doing everything she can to respond to his need. What has happened? What caused the Shulamite to change of heart? In Song of Solomon chapter 5 and verse 9, Song of Solomon chapter 5 and verse 9, the daughters of Jerusalem asked her that question. Song Song of Solomon chapter 5 and verse 9, it says, "What is thy beloved more than another beloved? O thou fairest among women, why is he worth all the effort? Why do you care so much about trying to meet his needs? Why do you care so much about being a good spouse to him? What is thy beloved more than another beloved, that thou dost so charge us? Why are you so insistent upon finding him and upon meeting his marital needs? Why?" Well, if you read verses 10 through 16, she reflects upon the right. She might have felt at first that his demand was too much. He was asking too much of her. But upon reflection, she realizes, hang on, there's a reason why I married this man in the first place. Now, a lot of the descriptions here in verses 10 through 16 are physical. But don't think that there are not perhaps realities behind these things. I'll allow you to read that text. I've been skipping over kind of these physical descriptions, allowing you to read them and make them what you will. But the conclusion of verse 16 of all of this, his mouth is most sweet. Yea, he is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, O daughters of Jerusalem. You realize this when you feel as though your spouse is asking too much, or if they are being too hurtful, or saying unkind things, doing unkind things, whatever it might be, when you really reflect upon it, you'll say, this is my friend. This is my friend. I want to meet her needs. Or if you're a lady, I want to meet his needs. You reach out then to make amends. In verse 1, the daughters of Jerusalem asked, "Where is your beloved God?" After hearing this great description in verses 10 through 16, they said, "Well, we'll help you find him. Where is he?" And you know where Solomon is? Thankfully, this is early days for Solomon. He's not gone to another wife. Where is he? Verse 2, "My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to feed in the gardens, and to gather lilies." What's all that talking about? Something about that picture rekindles her love for him. Because in verse 3, "I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He feedeth among the lilies." Saying, well, what is she seeing that rekindles her love? Why does she come to this realization, I am my beloved's and my beloved is mine? Interestingly, the American Standard Version puts this, "I am my beloved and my beloved is mine. He feedeth his flock among the lilies." Well, Solomon's not a shepherd. True. What are we missing as we look at that text and we consider what's being said there? Well, Solomon, of course, did not have a flock, but he did have a job, right? He was the king of Israel. He had duties that had to be performed along those lines. And as you think about shepherding, that must have been a very popular illustration. Shepherding is a very common illustration throughout the Bible. It would have been something that Solomon was familiar with because his father was a shepherd. And it would have been something that she was familiar with because she was a farmer before they got married. And so there's this idea that he is tending to his flock. What's he doing? Well, in fact, she sees that her husband is working. Apparently the search has taken all night, and when she finally finds Solomon, what is he doing? He's discharging his duties as the king. And what is he doing in that? He is loving her. Now, men, don't play this game. Don't say, she wants to hear, "I love you." And you come home and you say, "Well, I pay the bills, I buy you stuff, of course I love you." Well, don't play that game, men, all right? But ladies, do realize it's one of the ways that he loves, by providing for you. And so that's what she looks at. She sees him working, and she says, "I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine." Shulamite reaches out to Solomon. She does not wait for the problem to resolve itself. And in that process of reaching out, she rediscovers love. And I promise you, that's what will happen. If you dwell upon the hurt that you receive in marriage, if you dwell upon that, then have you ever heard the expression well, it usually goes the other way. Oh, no, this is the way it goes. You turn a molehill into a mountain. You make a mountain out of a molehill. Have you ever heard of that? When you reflect on something, a molehill is a very small, if you ever know what a mole does, they burrow in the ground and they make these little ridges in the ground. We used to get them in our backyard. I think it was gophers actually, but you get these things in your backyard, a very small little pile of dirt. and you reflect on that pile of dirt, and you get so frustrated at that mole for messing up your yard, and you get angry, it kills the grass, and all of a sudden this little tiny pile of dirt becomes a massive molehill. Well, the world does that with marriage. The world, when people get hurt in worldly marriages, they reflect upon those hurts, and they build them up and build them up and build them up, and then they're at work, and they're saying, my wife, you wouldn't believe what she did the other day. My husband, you wouldn't believe what he did the other day. And they complain and they complain and they complain, and all the time it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. But God's process is exactly the opposite. You put a tack on the hurt, and you go back to all of the good things that drew you to that person in the first place. Yeah, there's that problem that has to be solved, whatever it might be. Maybe it was your fault, maybe it was his fault. But you go back to whatever drew you to that person in the first place, and you rekindle the love. And out of that past love, then you respond with love. And you know, it's hard to be mean to somebody who's being nice to you. It is. Try it sometime. Paul said in Romans chapter 12, at the close of that when you respond and you return kindness to those who do evil with you, he said it's like heaping coals of fire on their head. One of two things is going to have to happen. Either they are going to leave you forever, which won't happen in marriage, hopefully, or they're going to have to stop, and they're going to have to start being kind to you in return. In worldly relationships, yeah, you be kind to people, and people think you're crazy and they walk away. In marriage, you be kind to your spouse, and you see how many problems that solves. Next week, we're going to talk about resolving conflict in marriage. We've kind of gotten to the point where we've considered it, we've reached out our hand to try to fix it. Next week, we're going to talk about actually fixing it. I hope you come back. Thank you so much for your attention.